Hello and welcome. My name is Diane. I work at So Let's Quilted in Dallas, and today I'm going to be talking to you about our latest block of the month, Graphic Jam by Sassafras Lane Designs. This is a paper piecing block, and I'll be using Favorite Things by Windham. These will be the colors that you see here and our backgrounds. Now you may notice that my dark accent is a little different from what's in the pictures and what's in your kit, but don't worry, I just chose that so we'd have enough kits to cut. So let's talk about a few things that we're going to need. First and most importantly is going to be paper piecing paper. Now this paper is not your normal copy paper that you get and put in your printer. This is a kind of thinner, easier to tear paper. And what this will do is allow you to remove the paper from the back of your blocks without popping your stitches. And trust me, nobody likes it when your stitches get popped. Some other things you'll need is going to be pins, glue stick, and I'll talk a little more on how we use these later, rotary cutter, thread, and a pen. You can either use a regular pen or a friction pen, whatever you have on hand. We will not be marking the fabric, we'll be marking on the paper, and I'll explain more on how I use those. Another really important product to use when paper piecing is an add a quarter or add an eighth ruler. I typically would use the add an eighth ruler if I was doing really small seams, so we're not going to use this one today. What we are going to use is an add a quarter ruler. Both of these are the same, add a quarter plus, and if you have just a regular add a quarter ruler, don't worry, that'll work just fine. What this is it has a little beveled edge right here to allow you to put it up against the paper and fold it. And we'll talk more about that later. And there's no difference between the colors. I'll add links in the description for everything that we use that we carry in the shop. So first thing we'll want to do is go ahead and print out the first block. You'll want to pay attention to the bottom here of how many copies to make. So this first page actually has 2 blocks in it. We'll have our block 1 blocks, and this is block 11. So when you print this out, cut them in half and then hold on to this part because we'll need it in a couple of months. So let's go ahead and take our first 2 colors and let's get cutting. And there we have everything cut. So I followed the instructions in the book, and that's definitely what you want to do. The instructions will give you plenty of space around to be able to cover your pieces, and the fabric required is more than enough fabric to cut all of these pieces. So we're going to focus on just one of these. The way I cut them apart, I like to do them individually, and I cut about 1/4 of an inch away from these lines here, and I just don't care about the extra. If you cut directly on the line, that is perfectly fine. You'll just need to line up with that towards the end, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So another tool I use to be able to look at the lines through the paper is a light board. Now, if you don't have a light board, that is perfectly fine. I've also just kind of held this up to the window, or I've held it up to a really bright light from the side, and then I can see the lines, and I very carefully hold my ruler and then just gently put it down and make sure it doesn't shift. It doesn't have to be perfect, not an exact science. Okay, so this is the side you will stitch on, and this is the side we'll place the fabric down on. And since we can't really see the lines very well from this side, we need to give ourselves some starting lines. So to do that, we use either a light board or a window or a bright light. So placing it to where everything looks backwards to me, I want to focus on this line between 1 and 2 because I'll be starting with 1 and then sewing 2 to 1. So I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to put my 1/4 inch line right on that line there, like so. And so now this line, I'm going to make a 1/4 of an inch away from my stitch line, like that. And you don't have to worry about like being exact within that, because you're just going to be placing pieces on top of this and it won't matter. I also like to just kind of go all around one, just so I know exact placement for number 1. And so what that does for you is now when you don't have the light behind it anymore and you put it down, you can see exactly where you need to lay your color 1 piece. So we're going to take our color 1 piece, right side up, wrong side down, and we're going to lay it within those lines that we drew. So now we know that all of our edges are 1/4 of an inch over the actual triangle on the other side. At this point, if you would like, you can take a tiny dab of glue, just a really little bit, and put it in the middle of that triangle, just a little bit. You don't want to put too much because this will get hit with an iron a lot. And sometimes glue can distort the color of your fabric. It'll come through if you put too much. So you want just enough that when you hit it and you hold it up, it's not going anywhere. So now we have our color 1 right side up on the back side of our paper, and you'll take color 2 or number 2, wrong side up, so right sides together, and you're going to lay it over and line up. You just want to make sure that it's over those edges as well. And now we're going to take a pin. Again, I mentioned this before. I like these flathead pins because it stays nice and flat. And we're going to pin away from the line between 1 and 2. So we're going to sew on the line between 1 and 2. So we want to make sure our pin's going to stay out of the way. So we're going to pin over here. And now this piece is ready to be sewn for the first line. And what I do is I tend to line them all up. So I'll take all 20 of them and just kind of factory machine do all of them. And then I will go to my machine and sew. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine getting ready to sew. I've already sewn side 1 to 2. Now I'm going to sew side 2 to 3 because I've already placed the piece there and pinned it. So at my sewing machine, I want to use a foot that I can see in the middle. Either this is just my normal foot, or I could even use this applique foot, which has an open space in the toe. I want to be able to see without obstruction straight down the middle to my needle. And also, biggest thing in, where are we at? Yep, over here. Biggest thing in paper piecing you want to do is your stitch length. You want to bring it down to a 2.0. You really don't want to go smaller. If your machine is already at a 2.0, you can leave it at that. Normally my machine's default is a 2.5, so I want to bring it a little bit smaller. And what that'll do is help us to tear off the paper when we're done. If you leave it at a normal stitch length and you tear off the paper, you run the risk of opening stitches or breaking those stitches, and you don't want to do that. So as you can see here, get me a little pointer. So on the first line, I want a few stitches outside of each. And those stitches are still in there. They're just torn off of here because when I put my add a quarter ruler right here and I folded back, I brought it up and pulled those stitches out of the paper, so they're still in the fabric. That's also a big reason why you don't want to just stop here, because if you just stop right here, you won't catch those, you won't lock in those stitches when you go to sew this way, and then these stitches could start unraveling on you, and you don't want that to happen. So we are pinned down on this side, and we are going to sew on this side. You always sew where you can see the lines. Even if you have a thinner piece of paper, it's like a tissue paper, you want to make sure that you're sewing on the side that you can actually read the words and see the lines. You never want to sew from the wrong side. So to make sure that I perfectly line up here, what I do is I kind of hold my presser foot up. A little awkward to do this. And then I bring my needle down. Let me make sure you can see what I'm seeing. So I bring my needle down, but not all the way. I just kind of want to see where my needle is. And I line it up with the line I'm going to sew on and scooch it back just a couple of stitches back. So that way I'm not starting directly on the line crossing, I'm going a little bit away from it. So once I'm happy with that, put down my presser foot, make sure I'm at a 2.0, and now I'm just gonna sew straight across, following this line, and I'm gonna go a couple stitches over. And so as you can see here again, just repetition, repetition, a couple stitches outside and a couple stitches outside. And that way it locks in your stitches as you go around. And even as you can see right here, this is in the seam allowance. When I sew this whole square to another square, this line will lock in my stitches. And so then I will take out my pin and flip piece 2 out. And at this point I kind of turn on my light, and I want to make sure that any pieces that are along the outside edge, when they're flipped over, they're going to be all the way past that outside edge there. So this way I have an overlap all the way outside all of the square. And so I ironed this one to set the seams. Again, you can finger press, you can iron it down, but what you'll do is just kind of hold it down. And then you're going to take your 1/4 ruler, flip to this side. Now the 1/4 plus has this little beveled edge, and what that does is it allows you to put your ruler right up against that line, and I kind of a crease with my fingernails. And those little bit of threads, you're going to be pulling the paper up off those threads. So the threads will stay on the fabric, but it'll tear off of the paper. And then when you move that, you've got this nice crease line, and you're just going to press that all the way down. So you get it nice and flat. And now the other side of your ruler has this little kind of lip right here. So you're going to put that lip right up against it. So as you can see, I move and it catches it. And what that does is it gives me this perfect 1/4 inch seam. So I take my rotary cutter, cut it, and that's my waist. Very teeny tiny. And then I open it up. And so now I've got this perfect line here. And we're going to take our piece number 3. Like so. Wrong side, right sides together. You want to line it up down here because as you can see here, we know, there we go. We know that this overlaps here. Now again, if you're using a light or a window, you can just kind of hold it up. Or you can trust that you know that seam, that fabric goes all the way down. And so a lot of things you want to check in paper piecing is you want to make sure that you're overlapped along this outside edge. Any other lines that are going to intersect, you want to make sure overlapped those as well, because when this flips back, if you don't have enough here, then you'll leave a hole, and that's just no bueno. So once we have that there, we pin it in place. And again, we're going to be sewing on the 2 to 3, so you want to make sure that your pin is far enough away from that line right here, that you're not going to catch it in your sewing, but you're still holding this piece down nice and tight. So once you've got that piece down, then it'll look like so, and you just keep doing the same thing. So we have, now we're going to go to the seam for 4, one right next to 4. So yet again, now it's just repeat, rinse and repeat. Put your beveled edge up against that line. And if you don't have a plus, you have just a regular one, you can take a piece of cardstock and put it here, or anything that has a really nice thin flat seam that you can just make a nice crease up against. There we go. And then we flip this over so that way we got our lip facing down. And we cut that piece off. And there's our waist. Very teeny tiny. That's what I like about the instructions in this book, is that the sizes that they have you cut your pieces give you really small waist. I feel like I'm not wasting a whole lot of my precious fabric. So now we're going to be doing the dark accent number 4. And for this one, you kind of want to make sure, like, kind of eyeball it so that your corner is aligned with that corner. Right there. You also want to make sure a little bit over these edges, just to, when it flips over, you know that you'll have enough over here. Another trick you can do is taking your pin and kind of eyeball a little bit of 1/4 of an inch and pin it down in place. So that's pretty good, 1/4 of an inch there. And then kind of flip back and you can see just about where it's going to go. The head of the pin kind of gets in the way, but it gives you a really good idea of, yep, that's the placement I want. I know that I'm going to cover those outside lines of, nope, I did want that. You know you're going to cover those outside lines. So that's where we want it to stay. So that's where the sew line is going to be. So we're going to pin down far enough away here and then take out this pin. And again, when we sew on this side and a couple of stitches outside and a couple of stitches outside. Even though these are going to be in the seam, you still want to do a couple stitches on the outside, because when you tear off the paper, you want to make sure that that doesn't start unraveling from here. So if those 2 stitches unravel, that's perfectly fine. We just don't want these stitches to unravel. And so once you finish sewing that, like so, then you can flip it back, finger press it, iron it, and rinse and repeat. So now we're going to do for 5. We'll put that up against there. Do a finger press. Flip this over so that way the lip is down. Make sure that the lip is caught on the paper. Cut. And then put it back. And so once you get the hang of it, it's really repetitious and it just goes really fast. And if you see why I do the like factory process. So again, we're going to go right sides together. The number 1 piece is always the only one that goes down right side up. Everything else goes right side down. And so here, as I'm placing this, I'm making sure that I'm well over this edge and I'm well over this edge. I kind of like to use the other fabrics, as long as I verify that they are over, as my guidelines. And so there, now this piece is ready for sewing a couple of stitches on the outside, all the way along, and a couple stitches to the other side. And so then once you have that piece down, you'll finger press or iron, and I'm just going to be repeating myself until we finish this one. You'll do the same thing, folding the paper back along number 6, cutting that seam, placing down number 6 right sides together, pinning away from your sew line, and then you'll finish all 6 pieces on one little block of 20. And one thing that I like to do is, because after you've sewn this piece down, this is very floppy. I learned from a master paper piecer is that she puts a basting stitch across any that are really flappy and just kind of like all over the place. So this basting stitch is well inside my seam line for the square. I don't, see if you can see that better. I'm gonna bring you down for a close-up. There we go. So here's my seam line for the square. Here's my cut line for the outside of the square. See there? And I started my basting stitch inside the seam line, and I went all the way across. I lengthened my stitch to as long as possible for a basting stitch. So that way, because now that this is done, we're going to trim it down. So that way when I lay it down to trim it down, that isn't flopping all over the place and going to get tucked under like so, and I don't realize it and then completely mess up all my work. So as you can see, there's my basting stitch. So now at this point, you're just going to kind of line up your ruler however you like. I kind of like to do 2 sides at one time because I like to be fast. So I'm lining my 1/4 inch line with my ruler up on the 1/4 inch line, seam line of the actual block. And then turning it around and doing the same thing. So as long as you line up your 1/4 inch line, you'll always get these perfect. And now we have a perfectly trimmed finished little block. So what you'll do is you'll make 4 of them. I only have 3 here right now. So you'll make 4 of them, and then you will place them in the correct orientation according to the book. Like so. So I kind of follow the orientation of the book just to make sure I don't get turned around, because I can be directionally challenged sometimes. And then you'll sew 2 together, and to sew 2 together, you'll just put them right sides together, matching up the corners, and you will follow along this line. If you want to make sure that you are perfectly in a corner, say this isn't a perfect 90-degree corner, it's like a weird triangle, what I tend to do is take a pin and I poke it through, holding everything, and I take a look at the other side. If I am poked through this corner and that corner, I know that I'm correct. And I'll take some binding clips and kind of clip these along to make sure that it doesn't move. Yep, so we are perfect here. And then I'll put some binding clips, take these pins out, sew along that line. So I'm back here at the machine. I have my 2 little squares that I'm going to put together according to the orientation. And I'm doing this off camera because I don't have very much space in there to show you. So there we go. I put them together. I'm not doing the pin test right now like I showed because I don't have my pins next to me, and I kind of do trust what I'm doing here. Let's see here. I'm going to chain up my foot as a personal preference to my 1/4 inch foot. I am a lazy sewer and I don't trust myself to stay straight on the line. And I'm moving my needle over because I've measured and I know that my default is a scant 1/4, and if I move it over to, it's a full 1/4. And if you don't know how to measure that, you definitely want to look into that. I think I might do a little short YouTube video on how to measure your machine and find out if your 1/4 inch is a true 1/4 or a scant 1/4, because trust me, that makes a huge difference. My 12.5 inch blocks used to not be 12.5 inches, and now they are always 12.5 inches. So, as you can see, maybe can, maybe can't. I will check in a second. I can't see what you're seeing. No, I can. Let's get the camera to focus. There we go. When I bring my needle down, I am in that line, and so I know I'm at a 1/4 inch. Now, to sew along a seam allowance line for paper piecing, you can have your... My brain just went dead. You can have your stitch length, either a 2.0 or your regular default. There's no preference. I don't think there's a need for that. There we go. As a personal thing, I always backstitch a couple of stitches at the end and beginning. But now you're just going to sew straight down that line. Like I said, I use a 1/4 inch just because it's a habit. I always sew with my 1/4 inch foot if I'm piecing two things at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I always backstitch at the beginning and ends. Where did my scissors run away? Here we are. I'll trim this here. Like that. And so you see here we've sewn from edge to edge here, following the line here in the middle. This is when you're sewing on these outer seam allowances, this is the only time you're going to go edge to edge. Normally on any of these internal seams, like I've said a million times in this video, you're going to go 2 stitches out of either side of the line. And so now when we open it up, it is pretty. And so for these seams here, it's a personal preference on how you want to go to one side or the other side, or to open them up or not. I would say that if you're gonna do open, what are you doing, cat? I am so sorry, my cat just like suddenly startled me being weird. If you're gonna do them open, you're gonna want to tear these out. It will make your life so much easier in the future. And so I'm gonna show you tearing the paper. The first thing I do is I fold it and I kind of finger press it. And I am sorry if you hear anything weird. He is playing with paper below me. And then you're going to gently pull. And because you've used a 2.0, it'll tear like perforated paper. And so I tend to prefer to take the paper off of seam allowances when I'm sewing my little blocks together, because it makes things so much easier. So you're going to tear that and tear that. Now, you will leave all of this other paper in here until we've sewn the block to other pieces of fabric. If you don't do that, you run the risk of distorting any of these pieces. And so now, you can see I'm not getting any pull from the paper. It just wants to lay open. So now I will probably fold this to one side so that way I can nest my seams in the middle. Oh, here it is. Because as you can see here, pull that back, you're going to sew 2 and 2, and then you're going to sew the 2 to the 2 to make a 4. And you want to kind of nest them in the middle to make your points match in the middle. And so looking back here, I did an open, just out of habit. I think he found a bug in here. I should probably go find that. So For block 1, you're going to make 5 of these and then set them aside. We will piece them all together at the end because they kind of interlock with background pieces, and it's like this one interlocks with background pieces, but like this one here interlocks with that square there. So you'll make the 5 separate and then save them, and you know, when we get to the end to put it all together, you'll have them separated. Okay, so that is my block 1 tutorial for Graphic Jam. Again, I am Diane from So Let's Quilted in Dallas. If you have any questions, please email us. I will link to our website in the description, and I believe we still have a kit left. So if you're interested, I will also link that in the description. So thank you so much for joining me on this short, not so short little tutorial. You have a great day.